We're so happy that you are able to be here, join us in this room, and celebrate our inaugural Glory Sports Summit. Thank you so much for coming out. We're here, we made it, and we're so overjoyed to have you with us. If I don't know you personally, or if I haven't had the opportunity to chat with you yet, my name is Lance Chung. I'm the editor-in-chief at Glory Media, and I will be your host and MC for this afternoon. So at Glory, we've always believed, at Glory Sports, we've always believed that sports has the power to really bring people together. And I think everyone in this room can really understand that in some sort of capacity, whether you're an athlete, a marketer, a brand manager, agent, or even just remotely interested in sports as a fan. It's really hard to deny the impact that sports has on really influencing both culture and commerce. So this is the whole point of why we're bringing you all together, why we're having our first summit, is to really talk about sports and. So we're really excited to be bringing you all here today. What I'm really excited about is not just the incredible programming that we have today and all the incredible talent and insights that you'll be able to get, but also all of you, our audience, are a direct reflection of really the vibrancy and influence of our sports community. In this room, we have pro athletes, NBA Canada, PWHL, the Canadian Olympic Committee, AFC Toronto, Canada Basketball, GE, Hublot, Lululemon, Roots, and so many more. So you all, have the ability to really make an impact and steer the future of sport in Canada and beyond forward. So a big round of applause for you for coming out tonight and everything that you do. Just as a quick bit of housekeeping before we get things started, on social media, we'll be using @GlorySports if you'd like to share your experiences or any insights that you've learned from our wonderful panelists. That's where you can find us. And I also just want to take a quick moment to give a sincere thank you to all of our incredible partners who have worked so hard to put this event together today. I'd like to thank Fiji Water, Pouge Canada, Carolina Herrera Fragrances, Ontario Creates, Hennessy, Southbrook Wines, and our incredible venue partner, Makeway, as well as my incredible team at Glory here today. So thank you so much to all of our brands and partners. So why don't we get started with our first panel? I'd like to welcome you to our very first panel of the day, where we'll be exploring the modern athlete. So what does that look like? Today, it's undeniable that the role of an athlete really goes beyond the court or the ice. Today's professional athletes are not only the highest performers in their respective fields, but also entrepreneurs, influencers, community leaders, brand ambassadors, and so much more. So simply put, they are really stewards of culture and commerce, which is why I'm so excited to be having this chat today with our panelists. Piper Gilles is a two-time Canadian Olympian, two-time World Figure Skating Championship bronze medalist and silver medalist, and a three-time Canadian Ice Dance champion. Talk about a CV. A big round of applause for Piper. Brian Levine is the founder and president of Envision Sports and Entertainment. He counts iconic Canadian athletes like Andre DeGrasse, who today was announced as the Canadian flag bearer for the Olympics. Oh. Yes. And Christine Sinclair as flagship clients, as well as organizations such as AFC Toronto and Kids Help Phone. Meghan Roach is the president and CEO of Roots Corporation. Before taking on the position in 2020, Meghan served as the interim CFO. She currently sits on the board of directors for Roots, which she joined in 2020 after serving from 2015 to 2017 until its initial public offering in October 2017. Thank you all for joining us today. So I want to get things started. Piper, you're such a perfect example of what a modern athlete is, one that has really used your platform to not only showcase your athleticism and art, but also as a springboard to cultivate your personal brand. Has building your personal brand always been a part of the plan for you, and how has it really helped you create new opportunities as a result?
Yeah, when I first got into sport, I thought, oh, well, once I get to the top, I'll have an agent and they're just going to do it for me. Things really kind of changed really after COVID, sitting in my apartment being like, well, I know I love social media. I know I like connecting with people, but how am I going to survive this? I'm not making money. Being out on shows is where we make our money. That's been canceled. Doing competitions, that's been canceled. So I really kind of had to think outside the box. So social media was my attempt to make a lifestyle and a living and provide for myself so I could continue to do the sport that I do. And I was sitting in an apartment with my husband and I was like, well, like, what do I offer as an athlete? Like, what do I bring to the table? And he's like, well, there's a lot of things that you bring to the table. You like talking, you bring like smiles to people's faces when you chat with them. Like, you just are personable. And he's like, why not take a shot? And I was like, well, I don't really know. It doesn't really it feels kind of forced and unnatural being able to like pitch myself to companies that I don't even really know much about and how to get brand partnership deals. And I started just kind of playing around with random products, tagging things on Instagram. And then all of a sudden I had one company reach out to me. They're like, hey, do you do social media content? And I was like, yes, absolutely, I do. And they were like, okay, great, like send me your rates. And I'm like, I don't have rates. So I'm Googling like, okay, what is my value based on my followers and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, well, you could do this. And then my husband's like, go hire. And I was like, are you kidding me? He's like, go hire. He's like, ask for another, like, don't just do one, ask him for 4. Or I asked for 6. And they were like, okay, we'll do 4. And I was like, oh, I got my first brand deal, and I was so excited, and I felt like, wow, like I can actually take control of myself and pitch to brands that I feel like I connect to the most. And it's skating, like we are beauty, we are fashion, but we're also athletic. So it kind of gives us all these different areas to kind of go into, and with makeup and athletic wear, but we also have to really, because of aesthetic sport, we have to present ourselves as beautiful and put together people. So fashion is also another thing that we could go into. So I really had to take a deep dive and think of all the things and outlets I could reach into, and naturally some things just became a fit. And I can't say that the success of social media right now has been a narrow and straight uphill line. It really hasn't. I think going into the Olympics, I had a whole bunch of deals, and then it dropped, since you have to kind of understand that you as a person go in waves too. Like, you aren't like the top person all the time, and it's hard to sit there and be like, wow, I'm seeing all these other athletes get deals that I want. But I think like being patient and knowing your true value, eventually those things will come back and you kind of will have another wave. So that's kind of where I am right now, but it's been a journey and a learning experience. But I think there's so much more that I can touch on, and I just can't wait for, what else I can do. And, the sky's the limit.
Yeah. And what did you brought up like an interesting point. What did that whole experience of talking to agencies and brands really tell you about, or teach you about, advocating for yourself and, understanding like what your worth is when you're talking to brands and brokering those kinds of relationships?
Well, I think it came down to how much time I also had to do these types of brand partnerships and deals, because again, balancing being an athlete and trying to be a content creator when you know nothing about this kind of stuff is hard. And I think, I actually had to turn down a few because I was like, I really don't know what to do for you. Like, I had one beer company and I was like, oh, I did it. And I was like, this doesn't feel like me. I'm like, yeah, I like a beer every once in a while, but like, I don't just say, hey, I'm a beer girl. That doesn't work. And I have children that watch my page too, so it's like, okay, like, what can I do to be a good role model? And then I have to kind of think like, I got to be smarter and not work harder. I just have to think like, where's my voice? Where's my path? And the more I talk to people, and I actually ask a lot more questions at some of the social content or events like this, what do you do, or what do you charge? And it's a weird question to ask, be like, hey, like, I know you do social media, like, what do you get? Like, it doesn't feel like a natural conversation with someone. You feel kind of dirty, but I don't know. I just feel like there's enough in me to just ask those questions to try to be better. And I think without putting yourself forward, you don't go anywhere. So I think I really had nothing to lose. And I think just putting yourself out there and asking those hard questions and feeling uncomfortable really made it work for me and is still working.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, obviously this is a world that you've really excelled in terms of bridging the gap between commerce and sport. How do you guide athletes from your standpoint in navigating the careers beyond their sports so that they're creating like a sustainable roadmap for themselves? And what are the considerations that you're asking them to really take into account?
Yeah, well, first thing, every athlete is different, and I'm surrounded, I guess, by a few. So Alicia Newman here, who's competing in the pole vault in Paris, and Marissa Papaconstantino, who's a Paralympian, and it's just touting your great work of profiling amazing athletes. And Andre over on there on the cover as you walked in, and each of them are so different. And Christine St. Clair is another one who's one of our flagship athletes. And so it begins with kind of looking at each of our athletes and what makes them tick, who are they, and never, when I got into the business, it's like, oh, well, this is the prototype of what an athlete should be. It's like, no, this is who you are as a person. You got to grow naturally, and we're there to coach you along. And if you want to do more fashion, we'll help you do more fashion. If you, like Christine, for example, she shuns that kind of world. She just wants to play soccer. And over time, I helped her find her voice with encouraging her to get involved with the MS Society and other things more recently. And so each athlete sort of, for her, being very pure to her sport and not doing much else actually sets her apart and raises her stature so that when she does make herself available, everyone wants her because it's very rare she speaks, for example, or like on her IG, her engagement rate is so high because she doesn't often put out posts. So whereas, someone like Alicia lives her life out loud, I guess is the best way of putting it. She's incredibly comfortable in front of the media in all different environments. So we support her in a very different way. In the case of Andre, which is probably a good example, he's really curious, always looking to learn and grow, and a lot of Olympic athletes in particular, but probably professional athletes too. I hate differentiating between the two because Olympians are professionals, but some of them tend to be a little bit single-minded, very obsessive, very focused on one thing. And what's special about Andre is that, when he's on the track, he's focused. When he's at home, he's a dad, or he's working on writing a book, or doing community work, or working on with his kids doing some artwork or whatever, right? And so, and then he was learning about wine, and I said, well, hey, I think we could launch a wine label off of your success in 2022, and we did that with Piloteri. And then as he was growing and we were looking at different brand deals, we're like, maybe you could start owning a piece of these companies that are approaching you. And so we launched ADG Ignite Ventures, where he actually has equity in 5 different companies now, and actually invested in AFC Toronto, the professional women's soccer team. And part of the reason for that was he grew up playing soccer. He has a daughter. His partner, Nia Lee, is an Olympic athlete herself, and so he believes in that. And so what ends up happening is he starts transcending the sport of athletic to track and field, and so there's a lot more open to him in retirement, ultimately.
Yeah, and also just planting the seed so that he is able to capture the equity down the road of all the work that he's putting in during his athletic career as well. It makes total sense. Yeah. Meghan, Roots has obviously a very storied and established history of working with athletes in the world of sports. I feel like everyone probably has some sort of personal story with Roots, whether it's like a sweater or like a baseball cap. And similarly, remember seeing some sort of iconic moment where Roots was featured and has worked with athletes, or whether it was at the Olympics in the past as well. What do you think it is about athletes that make them so unique in really impacting and influencing community and culture?
I think it's authenticity, right? So I think that one of the things that we focus on as a brand is we have these brand pillars: community, authenticity, integrity, freedom. And I think that when you think about those pillars, you think about athletes, yes, they're professionals now, Olympians, they're on the global stage, but in the end, they're just people, right? They have their own families, they have their own relationships, they're part of their own communities. And so I think that really speaks to people, right? They're real, they can connect on a real level. And I think, they're obviously operating at an incredibly high basis. I would love to be an athlete, but I'm going to tell you I'm an athlete. But the reality is it takes a lot of mental fortitude and a lot of effort and hard work to do that. And I think when you think about putting people on a pedestal, I think athletes deserve to be there a lot of times because they really put their blood, sweat, and tears behind accomplishing what they're doing. And it's difficult to get up every day and go and work behind, accomplishing such a goal. So I think that attracts people and that makes them an essential part of the community. And so when we've looked to work with, different athletes and do partnerships, we think about that. We think about the communities they have, the relationships they've developed, and the authenticity that they bring to the communication and the engagement with customers and with their friends and the broader community. And I think athletes are in a very unique position to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of underscores what I was going to ask you is really like what qualities do you look for in like an ideal ambassador that is an athlete that is like a reflection of the brand and how you work with athletes as well?
So, I mean, obviously authenticity, I'll say that again. But one of the things we're looking for is passion, right? You mentioned the beer brand, and obviously, we don't want people to be partnering with us who don't love the brand. We want people who love the brand already, who are excited about it, and for them the partnership is about, yes, a true partnership, and it's about putting them on the platform, giving them a platform to speak and communicate their brand messaging also, because, as you said, athletes are brands themselves, but it's also about thinking about people who want to be part of Roots because they like what we're doing too. So there has to be a real natural fit, and we don't like to force things. So we've been approached by different people in the past who've wanted to do things with us, and sometimes we've just said, this doesn't really make sense for us because what you're focusing on is not what we're focusing on, or vice versa. And so it's about do we have great alignment with what we're focusing on as a brand? Can we help you accomplish your goals? And an example that I give, so we did a partnership a couple years ago with John Tavares, and obviously really well-known hockey player, and he, you might think he came to us and said, I want to sell a bunch of product. He actually was really focused on his foundation. So we did a partnership with him and his foundation, and we sold a bunch of products and then donated all the proceeds to his foundation. But that was what he was really focused on. So he and his wife did this great photo shoot for us, and it was fantastic. But it wasn't about for us or him about generating revenue. It was about making more awareness for his foundation and then generating proceeds to that foundation. So there's lots of different ways that we work with athletes. But the first thing we always ask is, what are you trying to get out of it? What are we trying to get out of it? How do we have good alignment? What's the partnership going to be like? And we want to make sure that we have, again, true partnership, and it's not about us just giving people money to do something, because that just never really works out very well.
It's not just a transaction.
No, it's not transactional in any way.
Relationship.
Yeah.
Just to inject on that, that's refreshing to hear you say that, because unfortunately I was lamenting over dinner last night with your colleague about how, I hate to say it, but the reality is, and this is more to fire people up and encourage people to think about true partnerships, without naming names, heading into these Olympics, I'd say of the, we've been managing dozens of partnerships across all our athletes going to Paris, and I'd say 80% of them aren't actually true partnerships. They're very tactical. They're very, we need you to do this, we'll pay you this. Right. There's a little bit of negotiation along the way. Often it's in my DNA to try to say, hey, yes, obviously there has to be a brand fit and financially has to work. So we're never going to do something if there isn't that. But often some of the creativity that an athlete or the talent can bring to the table isn't being realized because things are structured in such a formulaic way. Now, the exception to that would be a brand like yours, because if you're not endemic to a specific sport, you're entering into it more because of the cultural alignment, the community alignment. Yeah. And that's where we've found some of our greatest partnerships as sort of those outliers, those brands you wouldn't think of. So,
Piper, you've worked with some really incredible brands. Lululemon is one that comes to mind, just top of mind. What's an example of a partnership that's was really fulfilling for you and really felt super authentic to your brand and also meant more than just a transactional kind of partnership? What was the ideal partner?
Well, I've had a few that have been kind of surreal moments, especially with Lululemon, because I am a figure skater. I've been in Lululemon since I was a kid. It was a dream partnership, and when we signed this NDA, I was my first thought was oh, it's going to be Nike, and I was okay, no other why? I don't know why Nike, but all of a sudden when they said Lululemon in our call, I was no way. This is a dream partnership. And when we found out that it was for the Olympic Games and then they were doing a brand new campaign to launch this new partnership, it felt I felt like a little girl, and honestly, I'm originally a U.S. citizen. I still am a U.S. citizen, but I came to Canada 13 years ago, and I remember the Salt Lake Games with the Roots, and I was one day I want to go to the Olympics and I want to wear Roots. And then when it switched and I wore it.
You can still wear it if you want to. We're not stopping you. But.
I'll call you later. But Yeah, but with Lululemon, it was just like, wow, like my world, like my day-to-day life is actually colliding with my sport, and I was so thrilled. And same with General Mills. Like I grew up, when we were chosen to be on Lucky Charms, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is my favorite cereal. Like, I hate the good stuff, and I eat just the marshmallows. Like, not a true athlete in that sense. But, those two really, I think, like, sparked my interest in, wow, like, I can actually accomplish these goals. And it wasn't necessarily because I had all the medals either at that time. I think because I represented myself, and Paul and I are just, my skating partner and I are just naturally kind and genuine people. Like when you see us out on the ice, we try to wear our true selves out there so people really can connect to us. And I think when those deals and those brands came to us, like they felt like they knew us, and I felt like that was such a proud moment. And I know like someone still up at General Mills like has me in their office in their box, and I'm still in that point. I'm like, wow, I have to pinch myself that this person has my cereal box in their office. I'm like, how cool is that? But I would say that those two were impactful in my life, and I just feel like I don't know if I'll ever truly top those. I mean, I'm sure there are, and I have more goals, but those two brands and those two deals were like probably my most like proudest. I think it fulfilled my childhood Piper. And I think that's what makes me so special. I still feel like I get to live this kid dream every single day, and I get to share it with everybody on social media and throughout the skating world. And I just feel very, very lucky that my social life and skating is all coming together and working as one.
So do you have like a box of Lucky Charms like framed above your breakfast bar?
No,
Reminds you every morning?
Could you imagine like, oh, hello me, like a little. I mean, maybe I could use it as motivation. I have a whole bunch downstairs in my thing, in my storage. But like even seeing my family that are from the U.S., they drove across the border just so they could collect any kind of product that we were on, and they just have the cardboard of us on like yogurt, and like it's a proud possession for them. Like they were thrilled, and I think it's so special too when I go home and I chuckle a little bit and I'm like, it's just a piece of cardboard that we're on, but like it's so more meaningful to know the people behind me that has pushed me and have been there for me throughout my whole career, that they can actually celebrate this small little thing. And I think that's what's so cool about these deals, is that it does change the life for the people that raised you and believed in you. And yeah,
because there's a whole community and support system that orbits around our athletes as well. That's a very important part of the formula as well. Brian, from your vantage point, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you see athletes facing when they're transitioning from their role beyond sports? Because you work with Christine Sinclair, for example, and when we're talking about professional athletes, these are individuals that are primed at performing in front of the world and competing at such an incredible level. But do you find that mentally they're prepared to kind of take on like this kind of 2.0 part of their lives after their role as an identity their role as an athlete has changed?
I think every athlete, actually, I'm going to answer the question. Just go back. I was reflecting on my comment before, which I think may have come across as being a little bit provocative to say, 80% of these deals we do aren't true partnerships. And maybe it's just the sensitivity around language that's being used. Because I actually think, when I started in the business I started working as an agent, I guess, in 2012. And I don't think it was until like 2015 that Instagram became a thing. And it fundamentally shifted things where campaign partnerships became a greater source of revenue. So don't get me wrong, business has never been better. It's just often brands or agencies will talk about a sponsorship or a partnership when they shouldn't be framing it as such. They should just simply say, hey, this is an in and out campaign deal and we're going to pay you a lot of money or pay the talent. Okay, let's just call it what it is. So I think it's just reframing things where it's the true multi-year sponsorships or partnerships are more a thing of the past. Occasionally they come along and they're very special. But to answer your question about folks, and actually this is a good segue to Simon Whitfield, who he was a flag bearer back in 2012. For those of you who don't know, Olympic gold medalist in 2000, silver in 2008, four-time Olympian in triathlon. Really helped put that sport on the map. He sort of said to me after, he was very comfortable to sort of go into the shadows, shall we say. He didn't necessarily want to stay in the public eye. He wasn't necessarily comfortable with that in retirement. And he also said, though, is like, unless it's a true brand partnership, I'm not looking to, show up to do an interview or sign autographs. Like, I'm interested in long-term partners only. Otherwise, I'm good, right? And so he clarified that in his mind, which was helpful. But he was also extremely curious. He did go through a bit of a challenging period for a time where he kind of lost himself a bit, and that's very, very common, and he's been very open about it. But then he really flourished, where he tried out so many different things, stand-up paddleboarding. He opened up a shop where he would take groups out for paddleboarding lessons. He became a carpenter, an apprentice carpenter. He became an investor. He was on Dragon's Den once with one of the companies he was invested in. And now he works with a sports nutrition company, a retail company, helping them identify athletes as influencers. And so he's dabbled in a lot of different spaces. And so he's done great, but it's that curiosity that I think has helped him. Andre, I'm not worried about in the least, because he's so well balanced across the board. Sure, he'll miss, that focus, the excitement that comes with competing, but there's enough other things that, I guess, as they say, fills his cup, I suppose. So, Christine St. Clair, I think she's somebody who has been so laser focused on soccer. That's defined her life. She has other interests, but I think she's already decided that, in retirement, I'm not saying this on her behalf, but she's openly talked about, she'll probably want to coach and do something that keeps her really connected to the sport. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Meghan, given the brand's history working with athletes and sports, and then also your own personal history, what has been kind of your greatest joy in terms of working within that universe and with athletes and meeting these incredible individuals that are at the top of their little game?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. There's lots of things that I find really exciting about it. I mean, I think I find, you talked about partnerships before, and one of the things we often do with different athletes and people who come in is they come into our leather factory, as an example, they tour around, and then they get a chance to kind of like play with the materials and design something for themselves. And it's always really exciting to kind of see the joy on someone's face when they get to see their idea come to fruition and the transformation of something that they had that was creative inside of them, and actually see that on a product or see that come to life. And everyone wants to be creative, but so few of us can actually take that and do it. So it's really nice to see when we can facilitate that, translation for them. That's always been really exciting. I also think it's been exciting to see different athletes, to your point, Brian, transition from being an athlete into something else. So, I mean, you look at, I don't know how many of you who know who Adam Van Koeverden is, but he was an Olympic kayaker. He won 4 medals in the Olympics. I think it was gold, 2 silvers, and maybe a bronze or something like that. We worked with him for years, and now he transitioned into a politician. He's done a bunch of different stuff. And even Haley Wickenheiser, I was in a panel with her a couple of years ago, and she joined the panel, and she was like, I'm so exhausted. And I was like, why are you so tired? She's like, well, I'm doing an emergency room residency right now. And I was like, wow. I'm like, talk about like a transformation of like becoming something else and having a whole separate career after you've had a really amazing career already. So I think it's been interesting to be able to partner with athletes throughout their journeys, and also see, sometimes we get really early young athletes who it's like they're the first time they've done something and they're excited to do partnership. And then we get athletes who've been there for many years and are thinking about, how can I leave a legacy? How can I do something that, can put me and push my brand up and continue to kind of be there when I'm not doing what I'm doing today. So all different facets of it have been really interesting and exciting, and there's been just so many interesting people that we worked with over the last couple of years.
Yeah. I can only imagine the wonderful stories and memories that you guys have had come through the doors at your office. Piper, do you have any advice for other athletes in terms of how they're looking to build up their brand beyond sport, and also just kind of build out the foundation for themselves beyond the panel, or beyond their sport and their career?
Yeah, I would say, my mic, yeah, there we go. I would say before you start on this social media journey, I know it's not for everybody. I think it's really important to find your line of how much you want to share of your life. I think it's been such a cool transition in the world of sport, particularly everybody's been talking more about mental health and the stresses of social media, of constantly being on that phone and the device, and you just forget that you're missing out on actual life moments. So I think finding your line of where you say, okay, like, this is what I'm comfortable of showing on social media. I know a lot of times even on mine, like I show a lot of the good stuff, and that's good, and I find that there's a line where you can go, I feel like I need to tell my story and be vulnerable, but you have to choose when you are comfortable. And then because I've done some things and I put some things out and I was like, whoa, I don't know if I'm ready for what I've just done, and I've opened this whole can of worms. But sometimes by taking those steps and being vulnerable with your people and your audience, the most rewarding things can come out of it, and you can start speaking with your community a little bit more. But I think really knowing who you are, what you're comfortable with, what you're comfortable doing, and sharing, I think is the most important thing when developing some kind of social channel, is finding yourself, and not losing sight, and especially because I'm an athlete, like when things don't perform well, I tend to be like, well, am I the problem? You know, and you have to be like, this is social media. There's like a whole bunch of strategies, and you know, the algorithm changes from time to time, and like, you never know what's gonna hit, and sometimes you know, and you get it just right. But just being your true self outside social media and finding your line in social media, I think, is really important when getting into this whole creative content universe.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point because, you know, the fandom can be really passionate and intense, and also want to keep, you know, taking whether that's like your emotional capacity or physical capacity, and you only have so much that you can give sometimes too. So how have you balanced that, like being able to engage with your community and your fans and give them what they're looking for, but also at the same time just ask for respect of your own privacy as well?
You know what, I think I've been very lucky, and I think I've set my tone of how much I can handle people from the get-go. But I love interacting with our fans, especially in figure skating. Like, you know, you have young kids, you know, that they're like, oh, you know, I want to be like you, and they'll send me their costumes and their things, and it makes me be like, oh, wow, okay, I'm doing this for the right reasons, because I remember being that kid. But then I get, you know, older women and grandmothers, and they're like, oh, I remember back in the day when this person was successful, and, you know, watching you and your career go, you know, from the beginning to the top. And, you know, I love hearing those stories because it inspires me. It encourages me to continue going. But I, as a kid, really had to learn that going, especially in skating, they used to have these panels and online chat rooms where they could chat about children, which I really don't like, and they still do it to this day. But I chose, and my parents were like, look, they're not saying the nicest things, but for your mental health and for your just sanity as a kid, you know, growing up in the spotlight, you need to find where you need to protect yourself. And I didn't want to hear that negativity. And I had, of course, you're curious, you've looked, and the one time you do, and you're like, wow, I really feel like crap after this. Like, I shouldn't have done that. But, like, you know, finding that line where you're like, okay, well, I know they're talking about me. Am I choosing to look at it? Is this productive? Is it not? But again, just knowing what you can handle as a person. And now I just choose to believe in whatever we're doing. And it makes me more confident going into things. So just drawing a line altogether on what you can actually handle and are capable of doing in a day and understanding. So
I can add on something. From a brand perspective, I think, you know, what you're mentioning too, it's okay to say you don't want to do something, right? And I think that's an interesting, sometimes people feel, and if you're in the public eye in any way, right, you're always going to be put on a pedestal, you're always going to be put at risk of having negative and positive stories about you, right? And you have to really be comfortable telling people what your boundaries are, and the brands are going to be fine with that. I mean, if you find a brand that says they're not fine with it, then, you know, you shouldn't be partnering with that brand, right? You have to really just explain it and say, yeah, I'll do this but not that. I'll do this but not that, and that's okay. But it's about like having those open and honest conversations and communications. So I think that your message is 100% fantastic, and I think that as a person who runs a brand, who wants to partner with athletes and be supportive of them, I would rather have someone come to me and say, you know what, I just don't feel comfortable doing the following things, but I'm happy to do this, than put themselves in a position where they feel uncomfortable and then later on they have mental health problems or something else because of it. And so I think, like, just wanted to say to the athletes here, as a person running a brand, it's okay to say that it's not something you want to be part of, and you just have to set your boundaries and work with people like Brian and people who are going to help and support you, and to be able to establish those limitations for yourself also.
yeah, I would also just add on, like, especially with Brian here, like finding the right management person for you too, like knowing, I've worked with other people and I felt like it wasn't for me. You know, you need to find those people that make you feel the most you and are willing to do it with you and get creative and push your boundaries. I think aligning yourself with your core people that will support you as an athlete or a content creator or just as a person, I think finding those people, make you shine and are more successful in that case.
A funny story along those lines, we were approached, my agency this winter, I guess, from Mattel, or Barbie's agency, and they wanted to create a Christine Sinclair commemorative doll, and I have to say I kind of laughed at first because she's not the most prototypical Barbie-esque kind of individual, and I know she didn't play with Barbies growing up. And now, granted, Barbie has changed fundamentally, in part because of the movie, but the truth is they were always that. It's just those stereotypes are really what rose to the top in most people's minds. And so I went out of my way to work with the agency, and we've worked with them before, and they were great, but I said, I'm supportive of this. Obviously, you can't go wrong with being associated with Barbie. Just the attention, the stature of it, the engagement rate is great. But truth be told, Christine did not play with Barbie growing up. She did not idolize Barbie. I don't know if she's seen the movie yet. And they said, well, could we ask you, does she have any story about Barbie growing up? I said, so I asked my colleague Kenny, who manages her day to day, and he spoke with her about it. And she used to rip the heads off of Barbie and use it as hockey pucks to play, and she literally told the management at Barbie, and they're like, that's okay. And she actually said this in one of the interviews, and by being honest and authentic. But then, of course, we pivoted, and it's like, but the reality is Barbie's come a long way, and you can be whatever you want to be. It's all about empowerment. And the media tour was just off the hook and crazy, and I have to say, I get as many people commenting about that Barbie campaign as I do her winning a gold medal, sadly. Or great for if you work at Mattel. But the point is, managing expectations makes my job a lot easier at the outset, gives the brand an out, and then ultimately helps the athlete feel more comfortable.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to ask all of you, maybe we can start with Meghan and then work our way over. What excites you the most about how athletes are impacting culture today and, foreseeably down the road as well?
So I'm going to throw out the WNBA as just a starting point. I mean, I think that the whole women's movement around sports has just been fantastic, right? And I think that I'm really excited about the work that PWHL, WNBA, I think the NSL, the soccer league. I think it's amazing that you're seeing professional women's sports start to establish, particularly in Canada, and that there's so much support behind it from male athletes and just, abroad across the board. And I have 2 daughters, and as a mother of 2 daughters, I'm incredibly excited for them to be able to see themselves on a global stage and for them to be able to attend some of these sports and say, yeah, I can do that one day if I want to. So that for me is really exciting. And we've always had amazing Olympians, and we've always had amazing athletes, but we just haven't put them out there on the stage in those professional sports leagues in the same way that we have for a lot of males, and in different countries it's different. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about the momentum that's there. I'm excited for the WNBA to start in 2026. I'm excited for National Soccer League to start. I think it's next year they're doing in April. In the PWHL, those are sold out games already. So it's great to see the momentum, and I'm excited to see where it goes from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, what about yourself?
Yeah, I guess going back to a point I made earlier, just reflecting on, there's some good and bad with social media, but one of the things it's done is enabled athletes to use it as a platform to add some different dimensions to who they are, so they're not just uninterrupted, more than an athlete, right? I don't know if they coined that term, but it's pretty relevant. And so what's happened is, with social media and then folks like Lori and other media outlets, I find that it's pretty easy when we go to talk to a publication or it's often the sports page, the sports writers, who have an opportunity to talk about something other than sport, and they're really engaged. So it's added various dimensions for each individual athlete that we work with, and then they become more transcendent. So they're not as dependent on how fast did they run the last race or how many goals did they score. They're more than the sport they participate in. Now, there are going to be some athletes that just don't want to lean that way, and that's okay. We'll just say, hey, we'll focus on your functional attributes, we call it, that are tied to your sport, as opposed to maybe more of the emotional attributes that you're not really putting out there. And again, that's okay. So to each their own, as they say.
And Piper?
For me, I just think it's this day and age with social media, it's really interesting to see athletes become their own brand. I think years and years ago, the brands, they were the brand. and now we have a voice to say who we are and what we want to represent as an athlete. And of course, like with social and TV rights changing, especially in amateur sport like mine, getting certain type of exposure only happens on social and streaming. So for us, this is a huge change in how we have to think as an athlete, especially for amateur sport. But I think a lot of people are embracing that. I know it's a lot more work, and I think you have to find that balance between, okay, like today I have to film content after skating or after sport, and I really don't want to, but do I want to continue doing sport, and I need to do this? So I think it's just changing who you are, but I think it's quite exciting for especially the younger generation. I'm like, man, I'm not going to be able to keep up with this. Like, they are able to just do it so quickly and just mechanically, but it's really refreshing, and it's unique to see the next generation kind of come up and just take over, and I can't wait to watch them and see what social media does and content creating for sport.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you to our panelists so much for their insights.